Good evening. We're excited for you all to join us tonight here for our shed antler hunting webinar. If you're tuning in for the first time this season, we've been able to put a series of these different events together. They've been really great and informative. I'm very excited about tonight and the group of panelists that we have joining us. My name is Jamie Cook. I serve as the state coordinator for Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever here in Iowa. I get a chance to work alongside the Iowa DNR in their hunter education program. And I'm really excited to be here tonight with you all. Again, we've got a great panel. We'll get to introducing them in just a second. But before we do, I do have a few housekeeping items to go over with you. Just to let you all know, basically our biggest objective tonight is for you all to get the information that you're looking for. We've got talking points in mind. This is the first ever shed hunting class that we've been able to broadcast on a webinar. But to make this more interactive, we're going to ask you all tuning in to do a couple of favors for us. One, check out the bottom of your screen. If you're joining by Zoom, you'll see the Q&A feature down in the center part of your bottom part of your screen along the menu bottom. We're asking you all to send your questions in that way. We're going to be answering those questions both behind the scenes and live for those questions that we feel like need to be out there for the whole audience. So be sure you all are sending those questions in via the Q&A feature at the bottom. For you all that are, I was just checking, I got distracted by my menu down there. People were wanting to know if they could hear me. For you all that are watching from YouTube, you all will need to take a few minutes and jot down the email address that was sent to you earlier this morning or later this afternoon whenever you registered. The email address is nicole.coney@dnr.iowa.gov. Again, that's Nicole, Nicole, .coney, CONEY, @dnr.iowa.gov. Though that will be the email address that our YouTube followers will be sending their questions and answers to. So if you've got questions, you're watching from YouTube, you can send them directly to Nicole that way. She will forward them on to us. So with that being said, we want to make sure that we make sure everyone's got the best use of their time tonight. I want to go through and make some quick introductions. First, we'll start off with Steph Busenbark. Steph is with the Woods and Waters Project. She has a podcast. She's based out of the Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area there along the corridor. She is a outdoor enthusiast, and we're certainly excited to have her on board here tonight with us on our panel. Also with us tonight is Andy Long. Andy works up at Jack's Outdoor Gear in Ames. Andy has been helping us with some of our programs this fall. He's a deer hunting enthusiast. I think he's got some great wisdom to share with us tonight. Then we have two of our conservation officers. First, I'll start with Brandon Berquist. He'll be covering some of our regulation information tonight. He's also out of the Boone, Ames area. Thanks for joining us tonight, Brandon. And then we have Bill Spees. Bill was thrown under the bus by Brandon, I think's how we put it. But Bill's a shed antler hunting enthusiast, and we're certainly excited to have him on here tonight as well. So a few things before we get into what I refer to as the meat and potatoes of our talk tonight. These programs that we're putting on, this webinar, is all in an effort to get more people outside. If you're like me, you knew that last spring when everything went crazy and we found ourselves staying inside and at home, the outdoors had a different meaning to us. We were getting outside in larger numbers. We want to see that continue. Both Pheasants Forever and the Iowa DNR. They're our big partners here tonight, putting it on along with Jack's and the Woods and Waters Project. But we want to see people get outside. We want to see them canoeing, hiking, backpacking, visiting our state parks. We want to see them hunting and fishing. We know that hunting in particular has been declining over the last 20 years. Fewer and fewer people are getting into hunting. And we want to provide courses like this in an effort to get more people out actively purchasing licenses and being part of our organizations out there in the field doing great things for habitat and for wildlife. So with that being said, that's the purpose of this workshop. Again, make sure you're sending your questions into our Q&A feature from Zoom. Again, if you're on YouTube, make sure that you check out and use the email address nicole.coney@dnr.iowa.gov. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Steph. Steph's going to be talking with us a little bit briefly here to get us going about some of the benefits of shed antler hunting. Steph, the floor is yours. You're muted.
Oh,
there you go.
It sounded so good too.
I bet.
Start over. Well, thanks, Jamie. Like Jamie said, I'm Stephanie Lane. I'm the host of Woods and Waters Project. I have an outdoor podcast. I am based in the Iowa City area, grew up hunting all of my life, and actually really didn't start shed hunting until later in life, which is kind of crazy. It just wasn't anything that we did. But yeah, I want to talk to you all about the benefits of shed hunting. And I think there's like just a few main reasons, you know, that people get into shed hunting in the first place. So maybe the obvious one is just enjoying the hunt for the antlers, right? And finding them and like kind of going on that treasure hunt. If any of you like to mushroom hunt, it's not kind of the same idea, but just being outside, enjoying your time, I think is probably the major reason. But another one would be acquiring information and the strategy to hunt. So if you're a new hunter or an established hunter, either way, shed hunting is really beneficial to understand the movement of the deer that you're searching for, what deer are out there, where they are, right? Where their antlers are, the deer was. So creating a strategy and acquiring information. And then another great reason is to use the antlers to create with or to sell with. And I'm sure with you guys here today, I don't know what your reasons are for joining, but I would love to see in the chat what your reason is for joining. And if there isn't an area I touched on of like why to shed hunt, I would love to see that too. But the benefits of shed hunting, getting outside is the major one. Like Jamie touched on, this is a big effort to get more people outside, and that may or may not involve hunting. So I think shed hunting is a great bridge between the two. Obvious benefits of getting outside, it reduces stress and lowers blood pressure. I think after this last year, we could all spend a little bit more time outside in the first place. It's great for our health. Obviously, it's a time away from our screens, a time away from our phones, and it makes you just more observant, and you're going to see things that you wouldn't see at home, right? So even if the interest isn't even to necessarily use it for hunting, you're going to get a lot out of it. For me personally, shed hunting also sparks like that curiosity. So when you do find an antler somewhere, why is it there? Asking those questions. Or if you're not finding them, you're going to have to start asking yourself those questions. Okay, where would the deer be? What are they doing? Why are they doing that? And that's how, you know, we're going to go into those tips and tactics as we go as well. But that is going to be a major benefit, is just getting outside. And I don't know how many of you on here, and I would love to see as well, are hunters or want to be get into hunting eventually. I know for me, I grew up in a hunting family, but my mom is not a hunter, but she very much likes to be involved in what we do as much as she can. So one of the ways to do that is with shed hunting. She loves being outside. She loves spending time with my brother and I. So shed hunting is a way for her to be connected and involved without actually doing the hunting herself. So I think it's a great way to get someone who's either intrigued by it or interested or just wants to be with you, or you want to be with them and be involved and kind of understand what they love so much if they are a hunter. Also, I think just unplugging in general, you know, whether you find antlers or not, I think that time outdoors, we all need a little bit more of. And like I mentioned earlier, it's just good for us. So just unplugging, restarting. The time in nature is, you know, we're animals too. Like we need to be out there. So the other thing I think is a huge benefit is going to be, like I mentioned earlier, the scouting piece or the strategy piece. So post-season scouting, we're going to go into the timeline of an antler, when they fall off, and then we're going to go way deeper into that. But a huge benefit of shed hunting is understanding deer movement, understanding where they are, what deer are where. Again, whether you're a hunter or not, you may or may not have an idea of a certain deer that's there. Maybe you've seen a certain buck on your property before and you want to know how they're doing and where they go. You want to check in with them, see that they made it through the hard winter. Those antlers are going to be a telltale sign that they made it. Because if the antlers are there, the deer was there, and hopefully they're going to be making it to the next season. So I think it's a great way to see just what's in the area, make sure the deer that you're watching are still in the area, and just have a better understanding of what's around you. So I think that covers everything I wanted to share. Hopefully that wasn't too fast. Any questions or thoughts?
So we had one of the attendees post on here that Randy has found one in his life, or excuse me, I found one in my life, but not even looking, and he felt like he won the lottery. So it was cool. And he keeps I still keep a lookout, but have not seen another one for years. Sorry.
Yeah, actually, weirdly, I have like all the antlers I have found have been pretty like small, which I think in theory is probably harder to find the smaller ones. And I have just like kind of gotten obsessed. Like once I found that first one, even though it was like a teeny tiny one, the first one I ever found, I also felt like I won the lottery and I felt pretty special. And it has just like created this spark to want to keep going. I do a lot of public land hunting. I don't stay strictly in one area or chase like any particular buck. So I don't feel this like attachment necessarily to one. But yeah, I think it just sparks something in you and you just want to keep going out. So I totally agree with Randy there. And the name of my podcast is Woods and Waters Project. And you can, I'm looking in the comments now, Woods and Waters Project. You can find me on Apple Podcast, pretty much anywhere, Spotify, Google Music, and my website has a direct link as well. I'm just looking through the comments here. But there's a question in here about how do you tell what type of buck it is? And I'm not sure if I understand that, like if I understand the question. Does anyone want to take that or want to pop in on that? And maybe I don't understand the question thoroughly too. And I can come back to that question, or I might ask you, I think Andrew asked the question. I'm just going to shoot you a message too and hopefully address your question. But Andy is going to be talking to us next about the basics of antlers. So I think if you're ready.
I'm as ready as I'll ever be. I get to talk to you about the basics and of the life cycle. And we're going to start with the difference between a horn and an antler. This is an antler here that is on the whitetail. Also, it is on mule deer, elk, and moose. They're on members of the deer family. The difference between an antler is that an antler grows as an extension of the deer's head. It's one piece truly made of bone. The other is a horn. Horns are a two-part structure. You'll see here that they have this bone structure and an interior bone portion covered by the exterior sheath. Horns are a sheath that's grown by specialized hair follicles, similar to human fingernails. Horns are found on pronghorns, bighorn sheep, bison, and others. Horns are typically found on both males and females, while antlers are typically only found on males. Antlers are shed and regrown yearly, while horns continue to grow throughout the animal's life. The only exception to that is the pronghorn. The pronghorn will shed his sheath every year and regrows it every year, a little bit bigger. There are several factors that play a part in the size of a deer's antler. Most notably is the age of a deer. Most yearling bucks are known as button bucks, but after the first year of life, the deer antlers will continue to get bigger and usually have more points. Deer antlers will typically continue to grow in length and mass until the deer reaches about 6.5 years of age. After that time, the deer will remain about the same size or start to decline in size. Other factors that affect the size of a deer's antlers are the nutrition and genetics that it eats. Nutrition is a very important piece of the deer for their growth of their antler, because it takes a lot of energy and nutrition to build those rapidly growing antlers. Genetics also plays a significant role as to how much potential a deer has in its antler growth. Every year, between January and April, most deer will lose their antlers. After the rut, the bucks have a drop in testosterone levels, which activates specialized cells called osteoclasts. These cells eat away at the pedicle of the antler, causing the antler to fall off. Shortly after the antlers fall off, new antlers will begin to grow. Some deer can lose their antlers earlier in the season if they're injured, if they have a limited nutrition or food, or if they are stressed due to weather conditions. Antlers are one of the fastest growing tissues known to man. During their peak growing periods, antlers can grow in excess of 1/2 inch a day. During the growth period, the antlers are covered in velvet-like covering. During the summer months, antlers continue to grow. As we approach August and September, the antler growth will slow and eventually stop. The antlers will start to calcify, and the deer will begin to rub their antlers on trees to remove the velvet. Once the antlers are hard bone, mainly by mid-September, the antlers have completed their growth period. Antlers have many functions for the deer. They're used during the mating period to fight or show dominance over other bucks. Typically, the winner of these fights earns the right to breed the does in that area that the bucks were fighting for. Antlers are also used for protection against other animals, such as a dog, a coyote, or a mountain lion that might be attacking them. After the rut, the testosterone levels drop in the deer, and thus begins another great season of shed hunting. So, yeah, it's kind of a quick overview. I know we'll go into a little bit more details with Bill, but Brandon?
All right, just want to make sure that my video started correctly here. So thanks, Andy. So I just want to touch on some of the rules and regulations associated with shed hunting. And what I'm going to be talking about is going to pertain to here in the state of Iowa. If you live outside of Iowa in another state, you may have different regulations. So you definitely want to check with your local Department of Natural Resources or Game and Fish Association, or maybe even your local conservation officer before you go and partake in shed hunting, because regulations in your state may be completely different from what we would experience here in Iowa. But as for Iowa, shed hunting is not a highly regulated sport. There are no license requirements, so you don't have to purchase a hunting license or habitat fee or a deer tag to participate in shed hunting. There's no bag limits, which means that, say, if you have a heck of a day and you go out and find 10 sheds, there's no limit that says you can only find 10 and not 11. So you can find and pick up as many as you want per day and have in possession as many as you want at any given time. There's no bag limits or possession limits for sheds. There's no size restrictions on the sheds. So if you find a spike buck that might have a 2-inch antler, and that's the shed that you find, all the way up to a great big mature buck that might be an 80 or 90-inch side, all of those are perfectly legal for you to pick up and keep. There's no established season for shed hunting. Typically, shed hunting, like Andy alluded to, usually starts sometime in January and tapers off late March, early April, when people are starting to move into other sports. But if somebody decided that they wanted to go shed hunting for some reason on a different time of the year, or say that you inadvertently came across a shed Deer hunting in October, for example, there's no established season to shed hunting, so you could certainly pick up that shed if you would find one, say, in October or the middle of August or whatever, because people stumble across sheds at all times of the year. One of the things you're going to need to be cognizant of is, especially here in Iowa, is the amount of private land that we have. And if you are going onto private land to shed hunt, you have to have permission to enter upon that private land before going. So if you do not have permission to be on private land, then you could potentially be involved in a trespassing violation. And if the landowner so chose, you could be charged with trespass. So it's absolutely essential and critical that you make sure before going on private property that you have permission from that landowner that you can go out and do that shed hunting activity prior to going. And notice I said prior to going. It's not something where you go out and then call the landowner an hour later or a day later and say, oh, by the way, I was out there. You want to get that permission prior to going on that private property. Public land is also a popular place to shed hunt, but I do want to point out that not all public lands are areas that you could shed hunt. We do have some established wildlife refuges in the state, and some of those refuges are called inviolate refuges, which have a restriction upon entry for any reason during a particular time frame of the year, and those are usually posted. And you should, if you come across an inviolate refuge, usually it's posted no entry upon that area, typically from sometime in September up and through the end of January. And then that refuge may open up then after a specific time frame for going into shed hunt or hike or whatever. But those are things that you're going to need to check on the local level where you're at, because some inviolate refuges may have a different restriction date on them than others do. So depending on where you are, and if you're wanting to go on one of those areas, you want to check what that restriction date is going to be. There's other refuges that don't have a restriction. And then of course, as long as there's no restriction, you could go and shed hunt there. Another regulation that we want to be cognizant of is what do you do if you find a buck that has died and it still has the antlers attached to the head or to the skull? Now, those are not considered sheds. So that's going to be a whole different ball game than if you would actually just find a shed. So what you need to do if you find what we typically refer to as a dead head or a dead buck with antlers still attached to the skull is, prior to taking possession of that, is you want to contact your local conservation officer and explain to them what you found, where you found it. And usually what we do is we want to inspect that animal and determine whether it has been shot or killed or manipulated by a human being in some way, shape, or form. And depending on what has happened with that animal, we could either write you a salvage permit for it, and then you can take that buck with the attached antlers on the skull. Or sometimes we find that there might be some illegal activity with it, and it might be seized by a conservation officer and held until we could actually make a case on that. So those deadheads, which we commonly refer to, are a completely different animal from sheds. And if you find them, you absolutely need to contact a conservation officer prior to taking possession of that animal. And each officer may handle things a little differently. I know myself, I try to go out and inspect those animals on scene and try to determine the cause of death, and then make a determination whether or not to salvage that animal based off what you're seeing. And most officers will do that. And that's what most officers would prefer to do. So with the deadheads, you definitely, I want to repeat one more time, is you want to contact a conservation officer prior to taking possession of that animal. And then one more thing I want to touch on for regulation purposes is There's people out there that are very serious about shed hunting, and sometimes they will train dogs to smell and locate sheds on the landscape. And you want to, the same thing goes with your dog, is you want to make sure that that dog is in a place where it legally can be, where you have permission to be. We don't want to see people sending dogs out onto private property and making the claim that, oh, I can't control my dog, and it's on the neighbors, knowing well that the neighbor doesn't want you to be shed hunting on the property. So keep that in mind, that if you are running a dog, that you want to keep that in a place where you legally can be, so you're not having to worry about any type of trespass issues with that. So other than that, that's kind of the meat and potatoes of regulations concerning shed hunting. And you'll see that there's not very many. Like I said before, no license requirements, bag limits, size restrictions, or established seasons. And the two biggest things for regulation wise is, of course, making sure you have permission to enter on private property, and then contacting that conservation officer prior to taking possession of a dead buck that still has the antlers attached to the skull. And if anybody has any quick questions concerning regulations, we can try to address those real quick. If not, I think we're going to move on to the next topic. Andy, is that correct? Or Jamie, I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. I've been running some tech in the background. I apologize for anybody tuning in. We've had kind of a glitch on the backside. A critical email didn't get out this morning. It got sent, but it was so big that it didn't make it into a lot of people's inboxes. So,
Jamie, there was a quick question I want to address.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Is those areas, those refuges, are commonly referred to as inviolate refuges, and they're essentially refuges established for waterfowl migration, and they'll be posted on signage around those areas where you cannot enter upon during a specific date. So there's a specific block in the calendar that's blocked off where that area is not supposed to have any type of human disturbance, so that those waterfowl, that migrating waterfowl can have a refuge to get away from people, so that they're able to migrate how they're supposed to, and have those rest areas and things like that. So it's called an inviolate refuge.
Good deal. We're just checking the chat out here on the right-hand side. Brandon, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. For some of you all tuning in, I was just saying we did have an issue with an email that was supposed to be sending the link to YouTube out earlier today to people who couldn't get into Zoom. Just found out moments ago that email went out, but it came back. And so nobody got that information. So we've been handling some calls, some frantic emails. The good news is this is being recorded. And so even though you may not be able to catch it live, it will be on our Take It Outside YouTube channel for a while. We're going to make sure we drop our contact info in there so that you all that are tuning and watching this later, if you have any questions, will certainly be at your all's disposal and available. Again, we apologize for the inconvenience, but excited to have the 100 and more folks on tonight. So with that being said, it sounds like to me things are progressing right along through here. We've had some questions come in. I think most of those have been answered. I see one coming in here from Neil Smith, National Wildlife Refuge. We can send along you all the information to Scott Gilgee. He's the refuge manager there. We'll drop that into the chat here too. Amber, we'll send it your way here shortly, so you'll have that. So make sure you all keep the questions coming and use the chat feature as you wish. With that being said, I think we're just going to keep rolling. Originally, we wanted to try to squeeze in a bit of a break, but we've kind of moved along a little quicker than we thought. Make sure you all are sending us your questions. If you have any things about antlers and horns, Andy did a good job there with that. One of the coolest things I learned as a naturalist back in the day was the fact that there's animal tissue and the rate of growth. Antlers are the second fastest growing tissue in the animal kingdom. And the first is cancer. It's not something you typically think is a cool thing, but if your family's been impacted by cancer, mine certainly has. We know how fast that it can grow and take over, and antlers are the second. So just kind of a cool random fact there that I thought I would throw in. So with that being said, Bill, are you available? Can you hop on, start your camera? We'll let you take it from here, sir.
Can you see me?
We can hear you. Can't see you yet.
No. There it goes. Maybe.
Getting close. Still can't see you. How about that?
How about
There
now?
we go.
All right.
There's that smiling face. We'll turn it over to you, Bill.
All right. So real quick, I'm just going to jump back. There was a question again on what is the policy if you find basically a dead buck, like Brandon touched on it. We've had that. I've seen that question now several times. I've answered a couple of them, but I thought I'd just, for those of you that are just jumping on, I'd answer it again. Policy is if you find it on a deadhead where the antlers are attached to the skull, you need to contact your local conservation officer. Here in Iowa, I know some of the other states, it's the same way. You can't, you're not supposed to touch them or disturb them or anything until you've contacted a conservation officer. Typically, they'll come out, take a look at it. It could, and the one thing I want you to remember is I know I almost could hear people cringe over the internet when Brandon said something about, sometimes we do seize them because, we have, we think that it's been killed illegally. What I want you to, in the big picture is, a lot of times the conservation officers are working cases in areas where one of these deadheads will show up in the spring. And, you could be the key to solving, the deer that was killed, a case in that area. So, that's partially why we would seize one if that would ever happen. Typically, I'm going to say 9.9 times out of 10, I take a look at it and I say, yeah, it got killed by a car. It's got a broken shoulder, something, something's not right. I can find something wrong with the bone structure, and I will just issue the tag, and away you go with your deadhead. So I just wanted to touch base on that again, and that is on public and private property, because we did ask if we need to do that on private property as well. Brando?
Bill, I just want to jump in real quick. You hear a lot of comments from people that, well, that's kind of stupid to have to have an officer look at it and issue a salvage permit before taking possession. But in the big picture, without the way that is structured, then you no longer have a regulated harvest of the animal. And what I mean by that, and we've actually made cases in the past where somebody may shoot a deer and walk up on it and to say, well, that's not quite the buck I want, or that buck isn't big enough. I'm just going to stash it out here and then come back in the spring and say, oh, wow, look what I found. And now they have shot 2 bucks or 3 bucks or 4 bucks, and your regulated harvest of the animal is then out the window. So there's a lot of things that need to be considered when you're dealing with deadheads. And that's why we have it to where the officers need to inspect every one of those animals that are found, so that we can make a determination of whether or not it was killed by human interaction, or whether or not it just got hit by a car, or was accidentally killed, or died of disease or something of that nature. So there is a rhyme to the reason behind why you need to go through those extra steps in order to legally possess that buck that still has the antlers attached to the skull.
All right. So I'm just going to take a brief second here and look at my list of what they want me to kind of cover up here. Habitat preferences for the white-tailed deer, at least in Iowa. Some of the best areas that I find to shed hunt are places that nobody else would look. And that's one of the things that you gotta, when you're driving down the road and you see that random deer or 10 deer out in the middle of nowhere in a bean field that's, a mile, 2 miles from, any timber or anything that, I guess you would typically call whitetail habitat. I want you to think that, that's probably where those deer are living a lot of the times. If you can find the trails that are, telling you that they are traveling a mile and a half, then absolutely, they're coming from a big stand of timber. I've done very well shed hunting small parcels. And part of it is, the bucks like to get away from the big groups. It's just one of the things that they do to prolong their own life, because they like to get away from the group, so they're not hanging out with everybody else. Small patches of trees, small patches of grass, fence rows. I found, over the years, I couldn't tell you how many antlers just on a fence row that maybe had one cedar tree or a mulberry tree or something, and that's where that buck wanted to be, because nobody had ever messed with him there. Obviously the habitat's going to vary in everybody's area. Some people, I'm up here in the flatland, but I also have parts of my area that are rolling hills, but it's all agricultural. So in our area, in Iowa, the crops are where, our deer are feeding most of the time. Some folks have food plots. A lot of people don't. So, on the public ground, the food plots obviously are going to get hit pretty hard by other shed hunters. The main thing is to be the first one out, right? But that doesn't always work either. I've seen deer over the years carrying antlers still at the end of April. When we were picking morels, we jump a buck that still had antlers. So you can't always go off of, I want to be the first one in there. And the other risk you run is sneaking into some place early, that you have permission is you're going to bump that deer out, and sometimes they don't come back. So, you got to take that into consideration. Where's he going to go if I do get in there early and bump him? Try to get as much permission as you can. Permission is not as easy as it was. I'm an old guy. Okay. So back when I first started shed hunting, I could knock on a door and I would literally have to explain to a lot of the owners that, deer shed their antlers every year. A lot of people didn't know that they even shed. They just thought, okay, well, they just keep growing. That's, the sign that it's an old buck is it's got big antlers. So it's one of those things that has just boomed in the last, I'd say 10 years, especially. So it's gotten a little tougher to get permission in those timbered areas. So you kind of have to adapt, start asking the farmers. Not everybody that owns the timber owns the crop ground around it. And there's nothing worse for a farmer than to have an antler of any size run through a $1,200, $1,500, $2,000 tire on a tractor. They're a little harder to find out in those, especially the corn stalks, but they're there. And so you may not get the hot spot, because they're bedding on a southern hillside in a timbered area, but you can't get in there because, maybe the landowner's grandson, or maybe they shed hunt or whatever. But if the landowner next door is, Joe Farmer and, just is trying to make a living off the land, you're going to actually help him out by getting those antlers out of those fields. So, it's a lot easier to get permission that I found on some of the crop ground that's sitting, the frozen crop ground that's sitting in between, obviously before planting season. So you can get out there, find them. A lot of times they're hard to find in the corn stalks. I think I already said that. Bean stubble, pretty simple, right? But alfalfa fields, don't overlook alfalfa, winter wheat, those type of things. You're going to want to, I guess I'm trying to think of the whole thing here, where if you're overall, the biggest number one thing is you cannot be afraid to walk, because you are going to walk miles and miles and miles before you're successful. There's I couldn't even tell you, some seasons they do come easier because they're yarded up. Like this year, with it being so bitter cold, I am seeing a little bit bigger deer yards than I have in the last couple, because last year they were, so warm, they were all spread out everywhere. This year we're seeing some deer yards where they're down in the river bottoms. They're, where they can still access food. They're in larger groups. They're stressed right now. So, they're using one another to help get broke through that deep snow and whatnot. So, the deer yards know where they're at, try to get permission on those deer yards. There's a lot of public ground where the deer will yard up as well. And so, I mean, if, again, you just got to get in there and try to, I guess I always look at it as, no matter what I'm doing in the outdoors, I try to leave the smallest footprint. Okay. And by saying, for those of you that don't quite understand what I mean, smallest footprint, in my opinion, is to get in, do a thorough search, but not so thorough that I'm going to, leave every bit of scent there and bust all the deer out. When I leave, I want to still see, have deer circling around me, a couple hundred yards away, that, yeah, they know I'm there and they're going to run off, but I know that they're not feeling threatened and they're going to return. I have been fairly successful on public ground, as well as, the private ground that I have permission on. So, like I said, though, it is very competitive anymore. So it's gotten a little bit more difficult as far as being the first guy in the woods, like I used to be. So take a look at my notes here real quick, and home ranges are going to expand, especially in a year like this. That buck that might have only been traveling a couple hundred yards for food and shelter and water. If the food's eaten up by now, this cold weather, this sub-negative temperatures, you're going to see their home range expand a little bit right now. I've got an area that I've shed hunted now for almost 25 years, and the deer are traveling right at 2 miles from the timber. And it's just a absolute highway through the field that they've been grazing closest to the timber, all the way across the road and into the next section where they're actually able to find feed right now. And part of that is because the snow piled up in the field that's closest to the timber, and out in the open, that next field over, it's windswept. So the home ranges have, and they've gotten lazy. The deer are trying to conserve energy right now. Those little wooded draws that are out in the middle of the sections near those food sources where they can bed up and still have shelter and water. Those are kind of, like I touched on earlier, is don't overlook the small spots, because especially in a winter like this, where that deer may not want to travel 2 miles, he's going to lay down if he's comfortable and feels safe. He's going to lay down and hang out there instead of walking 2 miles out across the open to get his meal. So, as far as deer sign and scat, everybody knows what deer sign is, right? You're this time of, well, right now with the snowfall that we've experienced in Iowa this year, I think the southern guys have it a little bit more than we do, but we've got about 8 inches on the ground right now here, and it's real easy to see where the deer are. And one thing I want you to keep in mind is, there's antlers hitting the ground right now. There was antlers actually hitting the ground 3 weeks ago in small numbers. We're seeing a little bit more of it now with the added stress with the weather. But, I want you to think about, okay, well, this field was absolutely torn up. There's a foot of snow or 2 feet of snow. This area was torn up, the second week of January. Well, if you're not going to be out there, walking in the second week of January, or you keep watching it, by the end of January, you're still watching. You're like, gosh, there's no deer hitting it anymore. I would still go walk those areas once the snow melts, because those early shed bucks that were the hard chargers during the rut, and a lot of your older deer that are stressed, maybe don't have the body fat going into winter, they're gonna shed a little bit earlier. So typically, and so don't if you're noticing deer in a place right now and you don't see them in 3 weeks when you start shed hunting, let that snow melt off a little bit and still go hit it, because there's probably going to be some antlers there. And of course, scat, deer poop, the one thing I've noticed that I like to see, and it's kind of gross, but when you're a serious shed hunter, if you start seeing deer that have the squirts, all right, that means they're eating things that aren't agreeing with their gut, just like us, right? So when you start seeing that in the snow, they're stressed and they're really eating things that aren't agreeing with their gut. But it also means that stress is going to, help them get rid of those antlers that you're looking for. So don't think that you have a whole bunch of sick deer out in the woods because you're seeing scours or anything like that. It's just one of the things you see, especially late winter, when they're eating food sources that may not be ideal for them to eat, but it's enough to help, keep some energy going in and out. As far as food and eating habits, I kind of touched on that already. Soybeans in this bitter cold, they love soybeans. They'll always eat corn, alfalfa, winter wheat. If you do have any acorns that are left anywhere out in maybe a timbered pasture or something like that, I would look in those areas too. I have had very good success hunting those timbered cow pastures, and again, it's kind of like looking for antlers on a golf course, because they stand out with the short grass. So I see there's a question here that says, is it easier to find in the snow or when the snow melts? And when have all the sheds fallen for the year? The second part of that, when have all the sheds fallen for the year? There's no magic date. Like I said, I've seen it. I think the earliest antlers I've ever picked up were December 27th on this is a December 27th buck that shed. He's a big 6x4. So, you can't, that's a December 27th buck. I have found them with blood and a wax ring on them, mushroom hunting in April. So there's no magic number. The other part of it, is it easier to find in snow or when the snow melts? Kind of depends on when the deer shed. If we have a big, this snow that we have right now, it's hard up on top, other than the most recent stuff we've gotten. If that antler's already shed, if that was a December 27th buck, those antlers could be under 2 feet of snow. They could be under 4 foot of snow in a drift. I like to get out and look when there's snow, and this hard snow that we have right now, they don't fall down into it. You can see them a long ways away. But as far as, is it easier? I think you're more thorough, or you might cover an area more thoroughly once the snow's gone. But the other thing that you have to remember is that 70, 80 inch antler is going to be food for the squirrels, right? So get out there and look early. Don't be afraid to walk in the snow. It's actually good and good for your cardiovascular health, but it'll test you too. So I don't necessarily think it's easier to find them in the snow. I think you're more thorough once it melts, because you're finding the ones that could be underneath the snow as well. This little guy right here is laying underneath the snowdrift. That takes all of 2 inches, 3 inches of snow to cover him up completely. So there's another one in here that Nikki Sisson asked, what does a deer yard mean? I call them deer yards. Deer yard is basically where a large group of deer are grouped up in a small area. And I see this a lot worse in these bad winters. So, or a lot more in these bad winters where, instead of seeing the deer out in the fence rows and in the little patches of woods, we're seeing them all together. They're in big groups, and you're not really seeing the random, 4 or 5 deer living in an abandoned building site here or in a fence row. I mean, they're all pretty much grouped together, and that's what I call call that, I guess. So and another question, with the large population we have, what happens to all the sheds that aren't found? Do they decay fast? They actually don't decay very fast, but they are a huge source of nutrition for rodents and mice. Squirrels are absolute devastation to them. They will turn a 90-inch antler into sawdust in very little time. So they will chew them up. Rabbits will eat them. It's they're calcium rich and mineral in them and everything else. So that's typically what happens to them. So they will get chewed up and become part of the ecosystem again. So let's see. Do deer typically shed both antlers at the same time and place? No, not always. I'm not going to say that they won't. They absolutely will. I have found antlers over the years that are side by side laying on top of one another. And I have found antlers that I have legitimately matched up a deer that is 1.5 miles to 2 miles from where I picked up the first one. And I've picked them up where I've found one shed on a Monday, and a week later I find one 1.5 miles, and it's like, holy cow, that's that buck. And a part of the reason that I can say that I know this is because I used to run trail cameras a lot, and I was really into seeing what bucks made it through the year. So, and that's part of what they want me to talk about too, is, if you're tracking that particular buck, you're going to learn a lot about what that deer's doing after you're done hunting it. So, I probably the neatest one that I had a deer that I was watching and trying to get an arrow in for, well, I never did, but for 2 years. And this deer was a ghost. I would get him on trail camera, and then he would vanish, and I never could figure it out. He'd never show up, shot by any of the shotgun hunters. Just really weird. And so just one day, cutting across the field that I had permission in, there was a cedar tree in the corner of a field, and I walked, I don't know, maybe 60 yards from it. And I looked over and I could see a tine sticking up out of the grass. And I'm like, there's a shed. So I walked over there, and that same deer's antlers for 3 years, it would have been the last year that I actually saw him alive, were laying there. The one antler from the year before that was laying there that still had a little bit of color. And there was a full set that were completely whited out, all right there in that fence row, and is in between, it's just one cedar tree in the corner in between 2 timbers. And that's where he must have spent 90% of his time. And the reason was he was safe. He sat out in the open, and that's where he shed his antlers. That's where he laid, I'm guessing, most of the time. So if you see drops of blood on a deer trail, is that a good indicator there might be a shed? Yes, I have found drops of blood, and 10 steps later, here's an antler laying there. I've also, with the snow and ice that we have accumulated right now, you got to remember that they're walking on that. They get cuts in between their hooves. So a lot of times you will see blood from that as well. do they only shed in winter season? They start growing in the spring. Okay. They're going to shed after the rut's over and after pretty much late deer season, there's going to be some deer shedding. So, end of December, early January, all the way through April, May, I'm guessing there's still some falling, that first couple of weeks of May. Like I said, I've seen deer in April that still have antlers. So, winter into spring is when you're going to see them shed. So, but anyway, so back to tracking that particular buck, use of trail cameras. I used to be big into this where I would, I'd keep trail cameras out from August until deer were shedding. And I did that so I knew when it was time to hit the ground, especially if there was a deer that I was looking for. I would keep cameras out and see if he showed up, with one side, or if if that deer had a scar on it that I knew I could distinguish, him once he shed. And so they're good tools. This year, probably not working the best with the sub-zero weather, but if you're going to run trail cameras, it's a great tool to be able to use. Talks about other gadgets and gear too. And the best gear that you can buy to make you a good shed hunter is absolutely a good pair of boots. That's what's going to make you a good shed hunter. Good pair of binoculars, something that not your little 3-inch bird watching in the park field glasses. I'm talking a really nice set of binoculars that you can scan an entire field, and you can get on a hillside and scan an entire hillside in a timber and try to pick those out. It's one of the biggest mistakes I see folks make is everybody's out there looking for the antler. Okay. I don't want you to look for antlers to be successful. I want you to look for part of an antler. I want you to just look for the tines, look for a tine, look for the shape of that main beam. You're going to, once you do it for as long as I have, which I'm an old guy, but once you do it for a long time, it just becomes second nature. And you're like, you'll see that curve and it's like, and you'll pick it up and you'll be like, gosh, I can't believe it. That 80-inch antler was underneath a foot of snow, and I only saw, a tine or 2 tines sticking out. So, that's I guess the field glasses are another good gadget. So, but don't look, like I started to say there, I just confused myself. Don't look for the whole antler, look for parts of the antler. Because if you train yourself to just look for an antler, you're going to see an antler. You're just going to see the whole shed. I want you to look for pieces of them. And I mean, you're going to find the spike bucks that way. You're going to find a little broken off tip that happened during the rut where they're fighting and they're bashing their antlers together. You're going to find that too. So I'm trying to look here. Mm-hmm.
So we had a question on YouTube since you were talking about good pair of boots and everything.
Yes.
We had somebody ask, so are socks as important as the boots are? Are wool socks worth the extra money over cotton?
I guess that's going to be user preference. I double up. I like to wear 2 pairs of socks. So when I'm out with my boots, I buy my boots about a half size big. That's what I typically do. So I can wear them with an extra pair of socks. But wool socks are great as far as keeping helping to keep your feet warm and dry. Another question that popped up here, is it legal to buy and sell antlers? Yeah, I mean, you can buy them and sell them, but the caveat to that is it is legal to buy and sell legally taken antlers. That's the part that so if somebody's trespassing and picking up their antlers that way, or if they're scooping up or stopping on the highway and whacking the antlers off of a dead buck in the ditch, or cutting them off of an illegally harvested animal, then that would be illegal. So it's legal to buy antlers. It's legal to sell antlers. I can attest that my antler shed hunting addiction actually paid for a trip for me and my wife to Canada bear hunting. So you can make some money, and those were just the throwaways. Those aren't the ones that you keep. Those are, I had so many of them that I just sat down and sorted through them. So any other questions on that, or what else do you want me to cover?
So we
Are
had
ditches considered public land? Oh, sorry. I see
Oh.
there's one on here that says our ditches considered public land. Road ditches from the right of way is going to be considered public land. Yes. So, and there's another one here that says I shed hunt. I shed hunt in southeast Minnesota, farmland surrounded by valley. The bucks be down in the valley over the winter, or will I have better luck looking for sheds on the upper parts of the valley near flat agricultural land? That one I'm going to kind of take back to, it's one of those ones where you're going to ask me and I'm going to say yes, even though it's not a yes or no question. But the reason I'm going to say it is, think back to just a little bit ago, I told you, those deer want to conserve their energy. All right. So I would start, if you have a particular buck you're looking for, I would start by looking at those areas nearest to the agricultural land, because he's going to be out there looking for food. And more than likely, if it's a bad winter like it is this year, he's going to try to stay as close to that food source as he can and still feel safe. Now, could that same deer lose one in the cornfield and another one down in that ravine? Absolutely. It's just one of the things that that's what's neat about it. It's everyone's kind of like a fingerprint. Everyone's a little different. So you just can't say if one area is going to be better than others. You're going to have to be the one studying your area and knowing what your deer are doing. So if they're not leaving the timber because there's locust pods and there's acorns and there's good food sources in the timber, I'm going to tell you, look in the timber, because that's where your deer are. If they're going out into that ag land, by all means, I would look from the timber to the food source, in the food source, and anywhere in between. So,
Bill, to kind of add on to that, I've always found south-facing slopes have always been great areas too, because the sun hits them and melts off the snow and opens up vegetation.
Absolutely. My biggest day ever was in a public in a state park here in Iowa, and on one southern exposed slope, I picked up 23 antlers. So, and that was in an afternoon. It was the best, absolute best day I've ever had as far as in one spot. So it's those southern exposed hills. They're gonna get laid. They're lazy. They want to be close to the food. They want to be where they can conserve energy. That sun's going to give them, help them conserve that energy by warming them up instead of having to, be up and moving around. So those southern exposed hills are wonderful, wonderful places to look at. So
there was also several questions on here about people asking about looking around fence lines.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that I've always found a bunch because the deer will jar them loose when they're landing on the other side of a fence. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
So, yeah, I mean, I've found my share of them that, at fence crossings. Absolutely. I have a system that I guess, there's a lot of folks that just go out and walk deer trails. It works. You will find antlers. I'm not going to lie to you, but just remember those deer are doing all, they're walking down a deer trail. So look for those things, like he just said, where they're jumping logs, where they're bedding. You start finding an area with a bunch of deer beds in the snow, check every one of them. Check, every one of them. I don't know if you've ever observed a deer when it's after it's been bedded in the snow, or even after it's just been bedded, period. I would say from my multiple years of doing this, that watching deer get up, even during bow season where there's no snow on the ground, one of the very first things they do when they get up is they stretch and they shake. And a lot of times they'll shake just like a dog. They're going to get up out of that snow and they're going to shake off to get that snow off of their fur or hair. And they're also going, a lot of times what you'll see is you'll see them stand up, and you'll see as it gets a little bit later in the year, though I guess I got to believe that the antlers must start itching when they're getting ready to start dropping. And I've got a couple buddies that have some deer pens, and they pretty much agree with me. But a lot of times, if you're watching a bunch of deer out in the field and you see one particular deer, he just keeps scratching at his antler with his back leg. A lot of kicking him in the side of his head and stuff. I think a lot of times those antlers are starting to loosen up, and they must itch kind of like, I guess I don't really know anything compared to us that because we don't really lose parts that we, but so it's just one of those things that I've noticed over the years, and some of the guys that have deer pens have told me the same thing, that they must just itch to beat the devil, because they'll rub them on things, or they'll scratch the side of their head, they'll kick them with their back feet, like I said. So are dogs legal for shed hunting? Yes, they are. So the biggest shed I've ever found, pretty big. Are cloudy days a good day to look? I prefer cloudy days to sunny days. Cloudy days, that sun's not, especially with the snow on the ground. I would rather shed hunt on a cloudy day, an overcast day, than a sunny day. So,
Bill, wondering if you could answer a quick, make a comment here. You'll hear people say that it's common where, not all the time, but you might find sheds from one buck that are close together, and the reasoning behind that, and maybe the imbalance that happens on that animal's head when you have one side weighted and the other one not. They tend to kind of work that off a little quicker. Could you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, let me see if I can find one here real quick, Randall. I kind of call them kickoffs. And I don't know how well this is going to show up on this little tiny thing, but just a typical pedicle on an antler. Okay. That doesn't, I don't know if it looks as good as it does on mine. Looks pretty good. That's going to be just a typical shed antler right there. So that pedicle is nice and clean. When I was talking about the wax ring before, actually, hold on. I've got a couple that I just picked up. I just broke the rules. I'm not supposed to leave the camera, but oh well. So this is a deer that I just picked this up. I got to figure out how to run the camera. Hey, there it is. So when I was talking about the wax ring, if you look right here, this is it's like a waxy substance on this all the way around it. And as you can see, this one's a little bit pink yet, because like I said, I literally picked this up about 2 weeks ago. But that's going to be what they look like when they normally just come off naturally. What Brandon was kind of talking about is a little bit later as they go, they might lose one. And it goes back to what I said, like he said, they feel imbalanced a little bit because one side's heavy, or they're itching. This is what I'm going to call a kickoff. So you see how it's actually, pretty jagged and nasty. I mean, this is a natural shed antler, but I believe that was probably a kickoff, or he, smacked it on a tree or kicked it. So because it was bugging him, and it just popped off, and it took a little bit extra with it. So that what you're talking about, Brando?
Yeah. Yep. Because essentially what happens is sometimes as a buck, when they lose one side of their rack, it creates kind of an imbalance. And they're kind of getting pulled to one side, their head. And oftentimes, depending on the tolerance the buck has of that imbalance, sometimes they'll just work it off right there, like you said, by kicking it with the back foot, scraping it on the ground, hitting it up in a tree. And sometimes you might find a shed actually elevated off the ground in like a honeysuckle or shrubbery or sometimes even woven wire fence, where a buck will just kind of peel it right off.
You bet. What are some signs of a deer bed? You're going to find in the snow a circular bed. I mean, a lot of times they'll paw down, try to get down into the snow a little bit so they're to get to the undergrowth, and they'll plop down and there'll be just a round circle out in the timber, or multiple round circles out in the timber where you've got a group of them that are all bedded down together. So that's what in a grassy area, it's pretty similar. It's just without take the snow out of the equation. You find the grass and you'll see just a perfectly round area, and again, you're gonna put all these things together: the deer scat, the round bed, and the deer tracks, and that's how that you're in an area where they're going to be bedding. So,
Bill, a good visualization to kind of think about for a deer bed is tons of people own dogs. What does it look like when your dog is laying out in the lawn or the grass and they stand up out of that? You'll see how it's kind of matted down and might have maybe a little whitish tint to it. Obviously, a deer bed's going to be larger, of course, depending on compared to the size of a dog, but it's going to be about the same size and so forth. And it's just going to be an area that's going to be matted down, and especially in snow where the snow is going to be melted, sometimes all the way down to bare ground.
Yep, absolutely. There's another question here that do kickoffs impede next year's antler growth or pedicle injury? I got to tell you, I don't know. I'm not on that end of it. That would be a question for one of the biologists. I can tell you, I've found kickoffs that I knew the deer, and the next year there's no difference. I mean, it was the same, a little bit nicer rack the next year, but I'm sure that some of them get injured bad enough that they absolutely, I would think it would have to impede some growth, just because some of them, there's so much bone on the antler at that antler end where they kick it off or gets knocked off that it just about have to. But I don't have the actual answer for you other than from my own personal experience and what I've seen. So anybody else answer that one? Anybody else got any input on that? Bueller? Okay.
I do have an email question that came in.
Okay.
So he wants to know, what is the regulations on finding bones or bones/antlers? He has 15 acres of woods, and yesterday he saw 8 deer. Not sure if somebody can answer that question.
Well, so the bone thing, as far as I'm aware of, there's nothing in the code that says you can't pick up bones out there in the timber. The antlers going to be the same way. If they're a naturally shed antler, they are perfectly legal to pick up. If it's an antler that's attached to the skull, then you would need to contact your local conservation officer and have them come out and take a look at it and issue a salvage tag. So, yeah. Let me look at my list again real quick. Make sure I got everything. Let's see. Session 5. Oh, that's use of antlers. Okay. Am I missing anything, guys?
Bill, I just was going to jump in here. If the other panelists can start their screen and unmute themselves, I think what I'd like to do here the last little bit is just to ask you all just some general questions from my stance. I have not ever endeavored to try to do this myself. And so I've learned a ton tonight, probably more than you all will realize. But any words of wisdom for those like myself that are getting out there that snippet? We've thrown a lot at them tonight, but what do you think's the big take home message from each of you all tonight? Steph, I'll let you go first.
Okay, awesome. Before I answer that question, I just want to hit on one thing real quick because it got mentioned a lot from the beginning to the end. A lot of you guys talked about dogs, and there was a question earlier in the chat about like training a dog that is older. So I just wanted to give the advice out there that there actually is like if you have an antler, there is wax that you can buy to make like the fresh scent on the antler and train your dog with. But my advice on that would be just using like consistent commands, whatever that command is, like find the shed, find the antler, whatever that looks like for you. But getting that introduced to your dog, whether it's a puppy, whether it's older, and making that a consistent thing, getting them excited about it. I have seen and know people that have trained older dogs to shed hunt. So that is a thing. And there are actually breeders out there who kind of breed a line like for shed hunting as well. But there's a lot. I saw like a couple mentions of that. And you can definitely train an older dog if they have the desire, if they want to do it, you can train an older dog to shed hunt. So I just wanted to say that. But my parting words of wisdom would be to be curious and stay curious. And I think just ask the questions like I mentioned earlier in this call of whether you're finding the antler or not. If you find one, ask yourself like, why is it there? What led this deer here? What are they doing here? If you're not finding the antlers, to ask those same questions and kind of just be aware of like the world around you and be in the moment and enjoy yourself. That would be my parting words.
Well, thanks, Steph. We did have a question come in. We'll toss it out to the group. What if you find a head with antlers that is all white? Are you to call the DNR?
Yes.
And I can add to this. I'll just add to this one. The biggest reason on something like that, yeah, it's probably laid out there for, 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 10 years. But if you've got a tag for it, nobody can ever, accuse you of having that illegally or killing it illegally. So sometimes you gotta make sure that you're looking out for yourself. So call the CO and get a salvage tag for it.
There is a list of all the CO's phone numbers and names for your county in the back of the hunting and fishing regulations also.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. Good job, Andy. Thank you for that. Brandon, quick question for you, and then you can give us your kind of words of wisdom there. Other question came in. Any concerns with shed antlers and CWD spread? Is there a relationship there between CWD spread and antlers dropping?
None that I'm aware of. Of course, CWD is transmitted via a prion, and that is prevalent mostly in the spinal cord and brain tissue of an animal. It can be transmitted other ways, but I don't believe there's a lot of concern with CWD spread in sheds. And quite frankly, I don't think there's really been a lot of research done on CWD in sheds. So what I'm saying is speculation at this point, simply because it's such a new disease on the landscape and there just hasn't been a lot of research done on that. It's more commonly transmitted through live animals with face-to-face contact, things of that nature. And
Brandon, how about words to true beginners out there on taking up shed antler hunting?
Words of advice is there are no winners and losers in shed hunting. If you decide to go shed hunting, you're already winning. And be patient. It's going to take time. And the only way that you're going to be successful at it and get good at it is actually spending time in the woods, in the creeks, in the prairies, and actually being on the landscape doing it.
Brandon, quick regulation question. How long do you have to keep a salvage tag for antlered or a head with antlers on it?
As long as you have that animal in your possession, you're to keep the salvage permit.
Do you know of any place that you can sell the sheds at?
Oh, Bill?
There's antler buyers all over the internet. If you type in antler buyer, you will be buried in places to sell them. I mean, it's gotten pretty competitive. So.
And there's typically two ways that people sell antlers. Is if you have a really nice antler, like Bill has held up some really nice individual sets, sides and so forth. Those are usually bought and sold on an individual basis. Some of the smaller stuff is sold via what they call poundage, where you might have 30, 40 antlers that, are from a yearling or a 2-year-old, and they really, don't have any trophy quality to them, so to speak, but they still have a value, and that value is found with buying them in bulk via how many pounds of antlers you have.
And they're also they're gonna grade those antlers by the pound, and they're gonna grade them into a couple different things as far as what they call white horn, which would be the ones that sit out in the weather and have turned really white and chalky, or brown horn. And brown horn are going to be just, like a fresh antler with the natural color still in the antler. So.
Another question here. This usually happens. Questions start rolling here, at the end. What about if you just find a skull? Let's say you're out pheasant hunting and you're walking through big stand of CRP and you find a white skull without any antlers. Still need to contact DNR for that?
It's free game on that one. So, yep, I actually have picked up a couple heads over the years off of shed bucks, and part of the reason I do it is because when you got that really cool set of antlers that you've picked up, you can kind of hold them up and see how they were sitting on a skull at one time and get a guesstimate of how, what that deer's width was. So yeah.
Very cool. Thanks, Bill.
I have another question, Jamie.
Yep, go ahead, Nicole.
Are marsh grounds a good area to look?
It's going to depend on what your deer's your location, your deer's habitat is. If that's where your deer are the only thing they've got to live in, absolutely. I've picked them up. I've actually picked them up off of the ice in marshes where the deer are, out in the cattails and eating the moss and stuff that's frozen into the ice. I've seen some pretty weird stuff over, a long career of doing this. But so I mean, the marshes are it's habitat. So that's just, it's whatever is unique to that area. Some of those big old bucks like to get in the hearts of those swamps, or, there's a hump or an island or something like that in that marsh. Sometimes you'll find them right up in, where they're bedding up on those little islands in those marshes. And, you might find a couple years worth of sheds because the squirrels aren't getting out there. The rabbits aren't getting out there. So yeah, absolutely. If that's the cover in that area and the deer are using it, I mean, there's really not a bad place to look. So.
Keep your questions coming in. We get a couple of other panelists that kind of want to get their send off comments. Andy, how about yourself, man? Anything, words of wisdom for the new people out there?
I think the best thing is just to get out there. I know when my kids were younger, it was fun taking them, and they really enjoy it now. One thing I kind of did was just a little bit cheating. The kids like that satisfaction. So I would actually go out and plant some antlers for the kids to find, to keep their interest in it. I'd take some older antlers that I'd found before, and I'd know where I'd put them. But to get them out there, my wife and 2 boys and I, we still go out. This year we actually bought snowshoes. So we've been out snowshoeing quite a bit, looking for the heavily traveled areas to know where to look for antlers for when the snow comes off. But yeah, just get out there. Don't be discouraged if you don't find anything. You will eventually. You'll stumble upon one if nothing else. So get out there. Keep hitting the south-facing slopes. Hit the fence lines. Hit the travel corridors in between where they're bedding and where they're going to food. They'll lose them just when they're walking. So. Best thing I can tell you is get out there and take a friend with you. So
good deal. Bill, we'll let you wrap up here with your words of wisdom. There is another question that popped in here though. Is it legal to shed hunt in the state parks?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Okay.
Parting words of wisdom. Oh boy. It's kind of what everybody said. You got to get out there. Get up. Put the electronics away and get out there. It's you're not going to find them sitting at home, and you're not going to find them on the couch. So get out and walk. Get out there and knock on some doors. Get permission. Go out and visit those state parks. You're gonna, even if it's not a state park, just your public hunting areas that have deer. Put on some miles, and always take water, always take a little snack, so if you get tired out, you can sit down on a log and take a little break, and don't be afraid to just basically, some of my best shed hunts are, it almost turns into you getting lost. I don't want you to get lost, but I'm just saying, get out there and just, kind of get off the grid and go places where that deer sign's taking you. So, wear those boots out. A good shed hunter's boots aren't going to last more than a year. So get out there and wear them out, and that's how you're going to be successful. And if you, it's like they said, if you don't find anything, don't get discouraged, because I've been doing this a long time, and I still have days where I get skunked. I mean, and I've taken years to get permission on some of these places, and I can still wander into them, and for whatever reason, that's just not time, or I walk by them or whatever. So, don't get discouraged, and get, like they said as well, take somebody with you, get out there and turn it into something fun. And because it really is, once you get into it, whoever it was that said it early on, that, it's you were as excited as winning the lottery or whatever it was when you found one. I can tell you, if you had a heart monitor on me, still to this day, I mean, I get way more excited about finding a shed than I do, shooting a deer anymore. I'm more into hunting the antlers once off the live critter. So.
Well, thanks, Bill. Appreciate you and your advice, your time. Also to you, Andy, Brandon, and Steph. Thank you all so much for volunteering tonight and helping us out with this. We know there was a lot of information. The good news is it's going to be on our YouTube channel at Take It Outside Iowa. A link will be coming out in the following days into your email inbox with some of the highlights, some of the different things that we talked about, along with a link to that station in YouTube, so you can watch this and refer to it maybe when you hit the field here in a few weeks. So be sure to do that. Also coming along to your email inbox, in that same email will be a survey about tonight. If there's anything that you feel like we can do to improve, we want to make sure that we get your feedback and opinion. Again, for those of you all that got tuned in late tonight because of our email mishap, we sincerely apologize. We're sorry for any inconvenience that it caused. We are standing ready to answer any of your questions, so feel free to reach out to us, talk to me. We'll be happy to talk to you and answer any questions you have from here on out. So again, thanks to our panelists, thanks to our officers tonight. You all have a great evening and have a safe time out there in the fields. Thank you.